In this video, we'll learn about brain research that improves the way we learn and communicate. And we'll do this through a tool called the HBDI, or Herman Brain Dominance Indicator. Now, you're probably familiar with the left and right brain ways of thinking. On the left side of the brain, we deal with things that are more logical, sequential, fact-based, or proven. On the right side of the brain, we deal with things that are more conceptual, intuitive, musical, or spiritual. The HBDI receives its name from Ned Herman, who based his information off of Nobel Prize-winning research by Sperry and MacLean. In this way, we have a 4-quadrant model for interpreting your HBDI results. The interesting thing about the HBDI, before we explain those quadrants, is that our preferences are filters for everything we see and hear. However, the way we prefer to hear and see things may not be the way others prefer to hear and see things. This is what makes it interesting. So the whole brain thinking model is based in these 4 quadrants. On the upper left side of the brain, you have logical, factual, quantitative types of attributes. In the lower back half of the brain, we have organized, sequential, planned, and detailed. On the right side of the brain, in the lower quadrant, we have interpersonal, feeling-based, spiritual, and musical. And in the top right, we have holistic, intuitive, integrating, and synthesizing. The front half of the brain is more concerned with thinking, and the back half of the brain is more concerned with doing. Now, some things that you might see with preferences towards occupational categories and how this plays out in your quadrants is somebody who might be a little more left-brained is likely an engineer. Somebody who is a little more in this green quadrant might be more managerial, like a project manager or a supervisor, or it is an administrative assistant. Then in the bottom right corner, we have somebody who might be a social worker or someone who might be inclined to develop music, somebody that's more intuitive with their teams. And then in the top right quadrant, we have those that are more artistic, like designers, or a business leader who sees the big vision, defines it, and helps others come along. So we see people tend towards these naturally where they're more inclined and where they have preferences. And sometimes it takes time for us to explore that. And that's why the HBDI can be helpful to us to better understand our own preferences and how we can make those strengths and even stronger and use them to the best ability, but also where we may not have a preference and where we can work with others to strengthen out where we don't necessarily have a dominance. Let's see how this plays out in a common experience like buying a car. So if I'm buying a car from a blue quadrant, what I might be more interested in is the performance, the fuel efficiency, or the energy efficiency, the trade-in value later on, the ease of maintenance and how it works, and the precision handling details. From a green quadrant, I might want to know the safety features, the durability, the practicality of it. Does it fit my golf clubs in the back before I go and buy it? And I might want to know what the maintenance requirements are. And before I show up at the dealership to buy it, I know what I want. I have done my research. From the right approach, this is the red approach from the back of the brain. I might be more interested in the feel and the comfort, and I want to love the car. I might be influenced by my sales and service experience while I'm there, and I want to know inside that it's the right choice for me. I might also be influenced by my friends' recommendations, where they shopped and what their experience was. From the front right side of the brain, from the yellow approach, or this D quadrant, I'm going to be interested in the aesthetic qualities. How sporty is it? Does it define me? Does it fit my personal image in the long range? And am I willing to take an experiment and be the first model buyer? Now, it's interesting to consider for a minute that we aren't going to make these decisions from one quadrant solely, but we're multi-dominant. We have preferences towards more than one of these typically. In some cases, we're whole-brained, but in most cases, you have 1 or 2 dominant areas where you're going to make your thinking, communication, learning, and decision from. Now let's talk a little bit about HBDI results and how to interpret them. So you'll receive this type of format when you receive your HBDI results. And what you see here are a numeric format and a visual format. Depending on your preference, you'll see which one you gear towards. So if you're kind of more in this blue quadrant area, you're going to enjoy these numbers. Now, these up here give you what the preference is. A 1 means that's your more dominant area. An adjective pair is what helps define what happens under pressure. And I'll go over that in just a minute. And then you'll see your actual scores, which are also plotted out on this chart here. So you can see that this person has a dominant toward the left side of the brain. This doesn't mean they can't go here over on the right. It just means that when they do that, they might either get really tired or might find it more frustrating, or they might lean on others to bring that to the table. Now under pressure, this person or this profile here goes less in the yellow quadrant. They're not thinking the big picture. They're not thinking, oh, let's get creative and brainstorm. They're thinking, let's get it done and let's do it together. Now, it's fun to see how this plays out in every individual. But as we make presentations and as we communicate, we want to ensure that we're addressing all of these quadrants to be whole-brained so that we're communicating effectively with others. Now, if I want to communicate to a certain person whose profile I know, I'm going to speak to them in that way. So if I wanted to speak to somebody from this red quadrant, I'm probably going to give them who and personal stories and more intuitive and perhaps emotional types of experiences or stories to help them understand my meanings. Where if I'm speaking to an engineer or somebody over here who might be more interested in the facts, I'm going to cut out a lot of that fluff and get to the point and show case studies that prove out how this works. I might be focused on what are the objectives we're trying to accomplish. Now, you've probably had experiences where you work in teams where it works really well with some, and then others it's like pulling teeth to get things done. Now, here's something that might be coming into play. When you meet together with people who are like-minded and have the same preference as you, things seem to just go smoothly because you're speaking to each other's preferences. However, when you bring in other people for different dominant areas, things can get a little more difficult. But typically what happens is you have better ideas and certainly address more of the areas so that you don't forget things like maybe meeting your budget or maybe staying on track of what the larger picture is. So you meet all the needs instead of just the ones you care about. Now, an interesting concept is that it's at the intersection of knowledge domains that innovation occurs. And so what we want to have happen in teams is to make sure that they're whole brain teams, that you bring in somebody who's interested in the facts, somebody who gets the plan and the details, somebody who remembers others in the process of this to help remind us of the empathy we need to feel, and somebody who gets the big picture and is willing to explore that and explore the possibilities. Now let's watch for clues, because you may not have the luxury of understanding what everyone else's HBDI scores are. What I like to do is I like to look for interrogatives. What types of questions do they ask? Are they saying, what are we trying to accomplish in this meeting? Are we saying, hey, when's this going to be done and how are we going to do it? Or are we talking about, well, who's going to take care of this other person or how are they going to be impacted? Or are we talking about, why are we even doing this? And so you want to address each of those areas when you present, whether you're teaching or communicating in a presentation to an executive. These are helpful clues that help you key in on how to communicate effectively to certain individuals and the preference that they have. I once sat in a meeting with high-level business leaders, and what they continually came back with, because this was a recurring meeting, is this one individual would say, what are we trying to accomplish? And so we knew when we needed to meet with that individual and communicate with them, we were going to speak to them in the blue quadrant. This is another way to look for clues. This is kind of a panoramic from Elder David A. Bednar's office. He goes through and shares what's in his office. And he himself describes, and there's just doodads from all over the world. Now this is yellow quadrant because he's showing symbols and concepts around his office, and they're displayed for meaning for him. They're probably a little more personal too. And so that's a red quadrant attribute. But it's not just a stale office. It's not something that just is very formal and has a degree on the wall, for example. or doesn't have books that are lined up and color coordinated from red to purple. Okay, and so the environment can be helpful for you to know how to communicate with these other individuals. Now your invitation is to apply the HBDI by taking note of interrogatives your manager, spouse, or children use. And the next time you speak with them, communicate to them with their preference and see how that goes. You might also create or download a quick reference about the HBDI to remind you to make your next presentation whole-brained. Remember to adequately address your least dominant preferences, not to leave any gaps on the table. I hope this has been a helpful overview of the HBDI and its many game-changing applications.